All right, everybody, it is 11 a.m. I want to welcome all of you that have joined here today to our OECS webinar series, Violence in the Workplace, How to Be Aware and Be Prepared. I want to start out with a few housekeeping items. Want to also welcome and thank all of our partners, TSSA, ABC, MPMA, NRASP, Lakes Area Manufacturing. Thank you all for being partners of OECS. Look forward to continuing that partnership. I also want to let everybody know that this is just one of our many webinars we put on throughout the course of the year. And in addition to the webinars, we do a lot of other things when it comes to safety and helping out a lot of businesses in the construction industry, manufacturing, mining, and many other places, industrial hygiene, environmental. So if you ever have any questions, want to get more info, by all means, please, give us a call at one of our main office numbers, visit our website, be more than happy to give you some info or talk to you on any questions you may have. Quick introduction of myself. I'm Tim O'Connor with OECS. My associate here, Ari, has joined me today. We both have gone through, when you see the acronym up there, WVPS, Workplace Violence Prevention Specialist courses. We also have some backgrounds in other areas. Back in my previous career in the military, I did work some significant incident type response, also doing stuff with actions for things that associate with how to define and how to develop activities and actions for things that are similar to workplace violence activities. So again, when we're going through, or if you have any questions, you see our emails here on the bottom. We'll give our information at the end. Ask some questions, email us afterwards if there's some other questions you think about. When we're going through, we'll have a few surveys for you guys today, and we'll be doing live poll results. So you'll have 30 seconds, a minute to answer some of the surveys. We'll go over the results briefly. We do have a moderator. Justine is online. If you have any questions, because we can't hear you, of course, please enter those questions into the chat box. And Justine may jump in once in a while with some of your questions as we're going. And then when we wrap up, within 24 hours, a video of this presentation will be on our website, and we'll cover that at the end as well. So just want to go over our agenda real quick. Folks, I want to talk to you a little bit today about all these things that are on the screen, of course, and I won't read them, but there has been, a hard approach with some of the things I've gone through courses with, learning about workplace violence, and some things, when I say a hard approach on really getting into the active shooter and a lot of these real serious incidents. Yeah. It's not all about the most serious incident.
No, it's really about just every situation that might come up that could be related to a situation or could lead to a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Ari and I want to talk to you guys and share with you guys some other things to do as far as planning, developing portions or parts of an emergency action plan with violence in the workplace potential, what you can do, what you should do, some warning signs, and then we'll get into some more escalated event criteria as far as, actions and things you can do. But we understand that it's not worst case scenario. It's not an active shooter at every one of these incidents. And that's what our one or main or priority concern is in all these situations. So we have more to share with you today on violence in the workplace and some things you guys can hopefully take out of here today to go back and talk with your safety committees or some of your staff and develop some of these plans. So our first poll question here today, folks, I want to just gauge the audience here today. I went through the list. I looked at everybody who was going to join us today, and I want to know, has your company ever done any type of workplace violence training for your employees? Have you done any type of class, run, hide, fight? Have you had a communication about it? Have you done anything with emergency action plan development? So I'll give you, a few more seconds to chime in here. And then we'll share the results, and we want to see what everybody's saying.
And this is specifically for the workplace violence.
So for workplace violence, yeah, exactly. Couple more seconds here, Justine, and then if you would share those results with everybody. Looks like everybody's punched in here for the most part. All right, so I'm seeing, what percentage is that here of no? Looks like 62% no. That's interesting, okay, and that's good and bad. Good that I'm glad you're here, because hopefully that when you leave here today and after we talk about this, you'll be able to go back and talk about what next steps are or could be for you and in your facility. And then, you know, see that you got 28% or so of you have. So that's good as well. 38% have. So good. And hopefully we give you guys a few more things as well to look at and to talk about afterwards. So let's start out with what is workplace violence. Okay, we're taking definition off of from some of the courses that we've gone, more of the mainstream definition of workplace violence. OSHA does have definition of workplace violence on its website. Okay, and NIOSH, there's some other areas as well, but we're going to share with you the main definitions. I'm not going to read everything again verbatim, but physical violence, of course. Okay, yeah. We understand physical violence, what that can represent, what it is, and we understand that. Verbal abuse, is that a form of violence?
It is, because you think about a manager or supervisor to employee. If you have someone that's constantly verbally yelling at someone, calling them out on something, it could be perceived as violence towards someone, because again, everyone's going to react differently to it. You have to look at people's backgrounds, and again, verbally yelling at someone, yeah, it could come across that way.
And it's a leading indicator, right? I mean, it can lead up to more potential for actual physical violence. Harassment, again, another indicator. Bullying, is bullying a form of violence? It certainly can be, folks. We're going to talk about some areas where HR understands a lot of this, has to get involved in a lot of this, but bullying can be another one of those indicators as well. Sexual harassment, there's many of probably have gone through classes, courses, topics. We don't want to go off the rails here, but can sexual harassment be a form of violence in the workplace?
Oh, definitely, because someone can feel intimidated just by someone's actions or by someone's words, and that could create a hostile environment.
Yeah, and you had a story too, right? From one of your.
It was an interesting story. This was out in Denver, Colorado, working in the warehouse, and truck driver wanted to come in and use the bathroom, and I said, sure, not a problem. My employees were running freight, and then one of my employees came back, and she just had a different look about her, and I was like, normally she's very happy, very smiley, and I was like, is everything okay? She's like, yeah, everything's fine. I'm like, truck driver walked in to go back out to his truck, and she just got really shut down, and I was like, whoa, what's going on? So I asked her again. She's like, the driver just made a very inappropriate comment, and I was like, okay, you know what? Thank you for telling me. I'm going to deal with it, and made sure that the driver was removed from the building to try to prevent anything from happening. But it was just a very, he made a comment, didn't think it was anything wrong. She took it the wrong, she took it the way she took it. And it was just something that was.
It had to be addressed. Immediate is better. And then disengagement and some, removing that driver, and then, making sure that particular driver doesn't come back to the facility.
Exactly. Just identifying the situation, taking the right steps, and trying to prevent anything else from happening in that situation. So again, folks, in some of these too, and getting on into number 6, psychological, emotional, different property damage threats, you got to look at all these indicators. Again, we don't have to get into the absolute worst case scenario, and we don't have to talk about somebody having a gun or a weapon of sorts. We will, but it's not all about the absolute worst case scenario. There's many other things here we want you to understand, we want to address, and we want you to at least think about as part of your plan on how to handle certain situations, because being proactive, having a plan in place is much better than being reactive. Correct. And knowing just what to do and how to handle that particular situation, because all situations are going to be different. you can't say that every situation can be handled the same way. Every situation requires a different plan.
Bingo. Folks, so a few stats, okay? So this one here is from SHRM. Again, I'm sure many of you recognize who SHRM is, what they do. A lot of help and a lot of great stuff there for human resources, policies, procedures. But on one of their sites, as I was going through and reading some stories here, this jumped out at me. 1 out of 7 Americans do not feel safe at work. 1 out of 7 Americans do not feel safe. Again, is it that I don't feel safe because worst case scenario, somebody's going to have a weapon? No, I think it lends credence to all of those things we just defined on what workplace violence is or can be comprised of, right?
Right. And I think you look at the demographics when it comes to workplace too, it has a lot to do with it. Workplaces are changing, evolving technology, but it's also opening up the door for more of these incidents to happen. So, social media is one that you look at, and that could be a huge driving factor because unfortunately different viewpoints come into play. And that's why I think that, and to me, that's a shock. You say 1 out of 7, it's just, it kind of hits home because, I think back to previous life and I always felt pretty safe at work.
Yeah.
I always enjoyed going to work. I enjoy what I do, but I always, enjoy going to work. And now I think people are more scared, like you said. So it's a shocker.
So another statistic here, and this is from BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I understand it's 2020, 2021, but they're always a little bit behind with compiling some of these statistics. In 2020, 392 workplace homicides. 392 workplace homicides where somebody went into the workplace and committed homicide. They killed somebody else. In 2021, 5,190 fatal work injuries in the United States. 5,190 fatal work injuries in the United States. And the number again is pretty on par, pretty average with the 4,800 to 5,200 every year. So, I know that statistics comprised of all types of workplace potential hazards. Okay. But then we pull out the number, what we're talking about particularly today, as far as homicides, 392. That number surprised me.
It is surprising, but it also keeps going up, which is, I think, the most discouraging thing is that we're not seeing it go the other way.
It does. Yeah.
And that's
so we understand, and Ari and I have talked about this. We went through this in our training. Folks, we understand that, many of you that are on here today, it may not be sales, retail, direct retail. We're talking about convenience stores, other stores, direct exchange of money, where robberies and things occur. So these statistics numbers are much higher. Obviously, law enforcement, medical care facilities, direct care, hospitals, again, much higher, as you can see in relation to the bar graph here and the bar on the left. But then we talk about these other 4 that are in the top 5 as far as workplace homicides by these selected groups: transportation, management, construction, production, or industrial. A couple examples: management. Why would that number be so high in management?
Well, Tim, that's a good point, because you think about it, and if you're HR on this call, on this webinar, if you're in management, you're usually the number 1 target.
Why?
Well, you're usually the one that's doing the discipline or the firing, and so that employee is going to take it out on you. They perceive you as the bad person.
Yeah, bingo. So it's retaliation, and it's sometimes, do people snap?
Oh yeah.
These are many of the stories that we've read and examples that we've seen. Transportation, folks, we're seeing an uptick there. Transportation, truck drivers that have to park and stay overnight. They can only be on the road for so many hours. They have to make sure that their logbooks state that after so many hours, I have to take a break. They're in sometimes remote places by themselves, dark parking areas or rest areas. They are susceptible to robberies, to workplace violent activities.
Well, the criminals, the bad guys, they look at the easiest path, right? And so, hey, if I can go after the delivery driver, why not? It's a shortcut. But I think one of the points you also brought up earlier too, when we were talking, was a lot of these tie together. You think about the management piece ties in with all this, but you think about transportation. How many drivers are delivering to those convenience stores where there could be a situation going on?
Find themselves just injected into a spot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then construction, production, industrial. We'll talk about that when we talk about types. There's 4 major categories of types of violence or workplace violence. And type 1 criminal intent, pretty self-explanatory. And again, we see a lot of this. Unfortunately, we see it on the news, on the TV every single day. And we know a lot of this is going on. Customer client, okay, violent persons, violent intent, violent situations or scenarios take place, and then things unfortunately happen and escalate, and weapons are brought in, or and then we get into the other type 2 and or type 3 and type 4. And folks, this is where I want you to understand. There is a large number out there of overall incidents. We told you the fatality numbers. The number of incidents is in the tens of thousands. Those are the reported incidents. Yeah. When we talk about, and we can only speculate so much, but we talk about potential for incidents that go unreported for worker on worker and personal relationship and other activities here that have violence or some type of issue in that engagement or in that incident. The number is becoming extraordinary. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of that worker on worker personal relationship. And I know you had, there was an instance in, I think it was North Dakota, right? The personal relationship one that spilled into the workplace.
It did. And this was a situation where two workers had a disagreement. The one employee was sent home. That employee was still very upset, grabbed a gun, came back and unfortunately ended up shooting two people. The two people he shot were in a relationship, and that's what kind of brought that together, right? It was the worker on worker, but then two people involved in relationship, and this person took them both out as because he perceived them as both to be the
so how do I combat that? What do I do then to plan for that? I mean, who would see that coming?
Well, and this is where, again, when we talk about being proactive, it's as a manager, as a supervisor, it's paying attention to what's going on in your workplace, but also what steps are you taking to try to alleviate that. So yes, you may have said, okay, well, I sent the person home. Okay, but you sent the person home, they were very angry. Did you de-escalate the situation? Did you calm them down? Did you look at the whole picture of it? And we can always go back and kind of second guess what was done. But again, you have to look at and you have to try to de-escalate the situation. You have to use all the tools that you have necessary. Maybe that employee now being sent home, maybe they should have been, banned from coming back to the property.
And we'll talk about some of those potential things that you could implement, discuss, or maybe even put into your plan here in a little bit that lends right into Ari's story there. So folks, our next survey, does your company have a workplace violence emergency action plan? Now, I want to be clear. A lot of you, many of you have an emergency action plan. We talk about evacuation in the event of a fire, a chemical spill, inclement weather, sheltering in place, depending on where you live, hurricanes, all of this other stuff. We have an emergency action plan. What we're seeing more in violence in the workplace violence is, where does it fit? It fits into an emergency action plan.
Right.
It should be a part of your emergency action plan. How in depth and how much? I'd say there's a lot of variables that make that, make it site specific, facility specific, geographically specific.
Correct. I was going to say that it's got to be based on your facility, based on your environment, based on what you're working with. Because again, different industries, different businesses may require something a little bit more specific.
Yeah. So folks, I see a lot of you have punched in here and said, no, we do not. What is that? 45%. A couple more people tallying in. I don't know. That's okay. That's another reason we're here today, is maybe you can get those answers. Maybe you have something hasn't been communicated. Maybe you started something. Maybe you don't. And then another 36% say, yes, we do. That's good.
That's good. That's
good. I'd like to see the number higher. Again, hopefully that, after today, it gives you some insight and some things to talk about to maybe get with your safety committee or your safety folks and talk about what you guys do to implement that plan.
And good. We'll talk about some other resources that we have available to for people.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So warning signs. All right. We're going to get into level 1, 2, and 3. And this, folks, we're going to talk about what we should look for, how things escalate, and then what to do, as I mentioned earlier. So tying some of these things into my first statement there, my earlier statement is, instead of showing you just all the statistics, all the gory graphics, the worst place scenarios, there's indicators, there's levels, as we like to categorize these, And then there's things that we want you to take home, food for thought, as far as what should or what can my response be. So when we look at level one, early warning signs, some of it intimidating, discourteous, uncooperative, verbal abuse, are these indicators?
It can be.
Yeah.
They can be. I mean, I think a lot of it too is just, you can look at how people are reacting to other people.
Sure.
Right? How are they treating other people in the workplace? Because that can lead to some of this that we see.
And then some of it, this is where we can stop it now.
Mhm.
We, instead of things gaining more steam, instead of them potentially getting out of hand, this is okay. This is where, in many instances, I'm sure it happens, HR jumps in. We're going to observe, we're going to document. Documentation, folks, is important. Report, have meetings then with those folks.
Right.
In your employee manuals, in your other policies, I'm sure you guys outline a lot of this stuff. But if things like this happen, the worst thing you can do is say, this happens, we'll let them go their separate ways and not address it.
Address it with with who's ever involved in the situation, because you want to have both sides to every story.
Right.
And you want to see if there is any other indicators that would be a red flag for you, which you can see if you start having those discussions with your employees.
Bingo. And we'll talk about some of those things to look at here in a bit. So level two, escalation of the situation. Now we have actual arguments, whether they're with customers, coworkers, whatever it is. Okay, not abiding by company policies, procedures. Again, kind of stems from level one. Sabotage equipment, breaking equipment, throwing things at work, outbursts, seeing self as a victim. These come usually when, hey, it's me versus them, management, my supervisor hates me, and people are they're showing up to work and they're already angry when they start the shift, and maybe it's just not a good fit.
Right. And I think part of that too is if they don't feel that they have a voice or someone that they can go to, they're going to have that resentment, right? If I can't go to my manager, if I can't go to my supervisor, then who do they talk to? Well, then they hold it all within themselves.
Right.
And now they're going to take it out either physically or verbally or in any way
situation. Communication,
yes.
right? With all things safety.
Yes.
And it's an important part here as well. And then some of the response criteria. And folks, I put the very first bullet point. If things are moving from 0 to 60 quickly, don't wait. I mean, you may need to call 911 to have an interjection or an intervention there from police officers, right?
Right, because you're trying to de-escalate the situation, and sometimes it really is just a simple phone call to say, hey, we've got a situation. It doesn't always mean the response is going to be coming in full force SWAT team, here we go.
Right.
It's just to, again, have the appropriate response there if something were to go sideways, and have that backup. So
Bingo. And then we talk again about reporting, communicating, meeting, documenting. And I keep saying documenting, folks, because if some of these incidences happen and you don't document, and all of a sudden you're at the second or third time and you don't have your documentation ducks in a row, it may be more difficult for you on the HR, on the business end side of things, to take more progressive steps.
Yeah.
So that's why we keep saying document. Okay.
Document every conversation, document everything that you see, just so again, you have that backup.
Right. Bingo. And then level three, further escalation, usually resulting in the need for some type of emergency response. And we'll get into some of that criteria. But folks, we're in red flag territory here now. Okay. Suicidal threats, physical fights, or even the physical threat, destruction of property. Anybody that, and not just utilization of weapons, but anybody that says, I'm going to get a weapon, I have a gun, I'm going to do this. That's
just the hint of it, the hint of it, hey, you know what, let me, I'll go to my car. I've got something for you. What do they have? They're not getting a candy bar. They're probably getting something that, could do some harm.
Yeah. And folks, again, as Ari said just a couple minutes ago, we are doing things here where we're trying to outline it and not tell you that every situation is like run, hide, fight, SWAT team comes in, worst case. No. We're trying to point out and show you all of these leading indicators, all these other things, and giving you some stuff to say, let me start looking at this a little bit differently. Not to say any of this was ever acceptable, but in 2023, in the age we live in and all the things we see in our workplace, in our environment, we all have a duty, and employers have a duty to keep their workers safe. This is part of it. All right.
And I always focus on the awareness. It's that, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. It's awareness, awareness, awareness. You want to be aware of what's going on in your facilities.
Remember, I mean, we still use this in many activities or when we talk about things, but to see something, say something.
Yeah, see, so yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's
So if I'm seeing something that fits any of these in any of these categories, should I say something?
absolutely.
And then who do I say it to? And that's part of
Right.
what we want you to take a look at and outline and then communicate. So now we're talking about what do we do if all this stuff is happening, right?
Yeah.
We also want to come up with solutions, not saying all these are going to fit and you're going to see, 13, 14 different points. Again, I'm not going to read every one of them, but diffuse, de-escalate, disengage. May
Yes.
take all three, may be able to stop at one.
Right.
We can diffuse, and I go back to your story earlier where you had to kind of disengage with that truck driver and everything from the situation and de-escalate your employee and then basically get the driver out of there. And then follow up was that guy doesn't come back.
Correct. And that's the important part is that you're following through from A to B, A to C. You're following all the steps in that process. But with this one here, I did want to tell a quick story.
Sure.
I had a situation where had an employee, I got a phone call when I was working for another company as a safety person. And the phone call was, hey, so-and-so had a verbal exchange. Think you should get involved. And I was like, yeah, let me come out there. And first thing I did was I went out there and I observed what was going on. I wanted to see the two employees, how they were interacting. When I got out there, they were calm, no issues, but I decided that let me start to gather some information. So I pulled the employee into the office with the manager, and manager was sitting at her desk, had the employee sit down. I was standing off to the side and just started asking me, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? Fine, everything's good. Did you have an incident with employee B? He was kind of quiet, and then he's like, did you guys exchange words? Yeah. And I won't repeat what was said, during this webinar, but and as soon as he said that, he lunged at the manager.
Oh my.
And right away I'm like, okay, whoa, hold on, let's calm everyone down here. At that point I had to pull him out of the situation and walk him out of the building. I didn't want other people involved, so it was, take him out of that situation, walk him outside, remain calm. I had to be very calm during this process. And just let him know that, hey, would appreciate if you just leave the property, don't come back. And then had to follow up with the other employee B, because there was actually some threat of violence from, employee B,
Sure.
but had to follow up and say, look, we removed the individual from the premises. At this point, he's not going to be coming back. And really just goes to that whole, you have to be neutral in this whole process. You have to stay calm.
You got to stay calm. You have to listen, empathize, yes, to an extent, but then, then you have to start getting into some of the next steps, right? You have to, disengage people. You have to get them out of there. And then once again, folks, then there's the after effect. Okay. Every situation, as you mentioned earlier, is unique. Appropriate de-escalation techniques are always going to be different. It's situationally dependent. But again, diffuse, de-escalate, disengage, and then disengagement is where things they're going to get out of hand. Even in the incident where the employee was lunging, now we're getting into physical violence.
Correct. And you have to take that, you have to try to eliminate that situation. And one of the things too that I want to point out is make sure you follow up with help, right? Does that employee need help?
Right. Exactly.
That's a key part of this too, is a lot of this, what we talk about, it's also making sure that person can get the help they need, because
we don't know what is going on in every employee's everyday life outside of work either.
Exactly. People have a lot going on right now.
They do.
I always use the phrase, we don't know what someone else is going through.
Yeah.
And so getting them the help they need. And sometimes we're that voice of reason in that situation.
Exactly. So folks, I don't like using OSHA as the stick. Okay. But I just did want to let everybody know, as long you won't see this as part of written into the Code of Federal Regulations, where we have definition of workplace violence. And then this is what you have to do. Now, there are some state plans who have passed rules or statutes in their state where they have now said you must have a workplace violence prevention plan. Many states already and have had those for law enforcement officers, healthcare facilities, because those folks deal with a lot of violence from patients and things on many occasions, been dealing, and that's tough. But now we're seeing states that are passing workplace violence prevention mandates and having a plan for their workplaces in construction and in general industry.
Correct.
Now, federal OSHA has not gone as far as saying that yet, or we don't know if they will. And I'm not here to say that they will or when they will, but when we start seeing that state plans are doing that, Minnesota, we have our own state plan here. But OSHA can always go back to the general duty clause. And this is, we alluded to it earlier, shall furnish to each of their employees employment in a place of employment which are free from recognized hazard. Can workplace violence or violence in the workplace be a recognized hazard and potential hazard?
Yes,
Absolutely.
100%. And real quick, we're seeing this too. You mentioned like convenience stores and retail and stuff. We've seen that where convenience stores, if you're consistently getting robbed, you know that there's a recognized hazard now. So what are you doing to protect everyone from that particular hazard?
Right. And some people, unfortunately, just shutting their doors and leaving.
Yeah.
So
Tim, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Clark just was talking about the other incident. He was saying, should you have called local authorities?
when in Ari's story there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I'll let Ari answer this. I mean, he did diffuse it and was able to do some of those things we talked about, but it is a good question.
It is a good question. In my situation, I was able to diffuse it, and I felt that there was no need to call 911. If the employee who did try to re-engage with me, then at that point I would have called 911. I tried to distance myself from that individual. So part of the scenario was when I walked him out, I wasn't grabbing him by the arm. I wasn't physically hauling him out. I was walking him out and then very politely said, leave the property, don't come back. At one point he turned around and I was just like, just leave the property.
But at that point, I guess I could see to the question that's being asked, because this is where, and we're trying to tell you guys the same thing. Don't ever want to see anybody get into a physical engagement.
Right.
It may be time, or even as you're walking that person out, hindsight is 2020, right? But maybe you could have somebody calling 911 and getting emergency responders, getting the police out there while Ari is doing that, and then he may recognize at a point, whoa, this may become physical. I got to go back inside.
Right. And that's where I was basing on, is that if I felt like the employee was going to come back at me, then I would have, we would have taken other steps. But I felt in this situation that he was willing to leave, and that's where I kind of let it,
Good. Well, hopefully that answers the question, but again, good question.
Yeah,
I
great
mean,
question.
I may have said, no, get, outside, and then if the person isn't leaving, call
Yeah.
authorities. Again, so what's the answer? And we're continuing to define it. There is no one answer.
No.
However, one definitive I can give you in this, as we're talking about violence in the workplace and with anything safety, folks, is doing nothing is not the answer.
No, it's not. You increase the chance of something happening.
Right. Failure to act will increase, casualties if there were an active shooter incident, or just failure to act. As far as some of the stories we shared, some of the things we outlined, could potentially escalate to something where it becomes worse. So have a plan, outline the plan, communicate the plan, train on the plan, let all your folks know, what they can do, what they should do if some of these things occur, and then individual awareness. To see something, say something. Once again, situational awareness, paying attention to your coworkers, different behaviors with the coworkers.
Yes, just again, you have to pay attention to your surroundings. You have to know what's going on. Real quick, funny story. I was going up to a small town in Minnesota for a client, and I pulled over to catch up on some emails. Next thing you know, I had a knock on the window, and it was the sheriff's department. And I was like, hi, can I help you? And he's like, yeah, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm just checking some emails before I head to a client. And he's like, oh, well, we got a phone call. And I was like, a phone call? I'm like, I come up here every month. I'm like, who doesn't know me? And sure enough, it was someone that ran a daycare out of their house.
Oh,
And she didn't recognize my car. And I was like, you know what? Good for her.
Better be safe than sorry,
Yeah,
right?
I said, well, thank you. I appreciate you, stopping and
Yeah.
checking this out. I
And
said,
if I seen you sitting in a parked car outside of my house, I may call the authorities myself.
I do
So,
look suspicious. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, folks, our next survey question. Does your company have a process? So a lot of the things we were just talking about here or leading into, For example, background checks, employment, personal reference checks. Remember all those references we used
Oh,
to
God.
give for, social media checks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that to identify potential employees or current employees with a propensity of violence. This one gets a little tricky, and we'll let everybody answer here. And then we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Wait, are you saying that social media could be an indicator?
Yeah, I know, right? Now, I don't have social media, but we'll talk a little bit about it and some things to look at here in a minute. And again, with the background checks and references, a lot of people do that, used to do it. And then over the last few years, I've seen a decline in background checks because, quite frankly, it's been tough to get employees.
Well, I've even seen the calling the former employee, right?
Yeah.
You used to call the former employer and say, hey, is this person, rehireable? And that used to be a good indicator, if they said, nope, that
Right.
might be something to look at.
So it looks like everybody's punched in here, and what we got a large percent of yeses. Good. So whether it's one or all of those, 70%, awesome. Few folks don't know, 22% or 23% saying no. So again, we'll give you guys a few bits of advice and some food for thought here as we continue to talk about these and see if we can give you some ideas to bring to the table. So let's talk a little bit about that survey poll and some of those points we were just discussing. Check out new hires, background checks. To what extent? It differs. It should differ. Okay. If you need to do a really thorough background check, even security clearance checks at some of my clients for different things, they get pretty in depth. Or you may not need to go that in depth, but doing some type of background check and a reference check, calling personal references. Usually folks, when they're putting it on their reference sheet, they're going to give people that will probably give them a glowing review. I understand that, but being able to contact previous employers or somebody from their place of previous employment is a good reference check as well.
Correct, because again, you're looking at their job history, you're looking at their work history, you're looking at who's going to vouch for them, who's going to say, they're a good person. But it really does start with some process to get in place, because if you don't take the time to do that, the chances are you're going to get someone in there that could potentially be.
Potentially, we don't know what we don't know, right? And then identify high-risk persons or activities. Well, how do I do this? Again, background checks, more upfront administrative work prior to bringing new hires in, and even with current employees. And one of these things, we mentioned it in the poll question there, I said social media checks. Well, how do I check people's social media? Well, a lot of them are open, right? A lot of
public.
Is it illegal?
No,
it's
public information.
It's not. I mean, if people say you got to be accepted to get into their link or whatever, I'm not that savvy on all the platforms and the streams. I'll be honest. However, why would you want to keep an eye on that? Have HR people in some of our clients, and as I've seen in other businesses, they moderate, or they take a look at this stuff to check in on some of these social media accounts. Why?
Because you can see what activities they're doing. If they're belonging to groups that could be promoting hate or violence, they could be, again, at work, they're happy-go-lucky, but then on Facebook or social media, they're posting very negative comments or very negative tone,
right?
Or things are a trigger for them, so to speak. I hate that word, but it is a trigger for them, right? And you're going to see those trends. You're going to see the people that are very reactive to something. Are they reacting to someone all the time? Are they engaging in posts just to antagonize someone?
Yeah, and folks, it's not just HR or whomever, saying or having the duty to go and check everybody's social media accounts. I'll give a specific example in a story at a client of mine. This was a couple of years back. It was not the HR or their manager or whomever, but it was one employee coming to tell HR that, hey, you're not going to believe what I seen on, employee B's social media site there. And then they went in and looked at it. And what they did find on that social media site was disturbing enough to the point where they terminated that employee. I'm not saying, the cancel everybody. I'm just saying there's some things that this is a way, this is a stream for you to find out when there's cause for concern, I
Right.
guess is what I'm saying. Not, people go out and they do some things, post pictures. I'm not saying because you don't like this or that, but in this incident, it had to do with some of those hate things that you were mentioning.
Right, it's an indicator. It's
It's an
a potential indicator.
Yeah.
And
And then train employees, and then we'll talk, a little bit about securing the facility. So we talked a little bit about recognizing warning signs. We gotta get education and training in there regarding violence in the workplace, and then creating and training to some form of plan of what to
Yes.
do, all of those indicators, all of things I should be looking for, examples we just gave. And then, going back what I just talked about when I said securing the building, well, there's all types of ways to have better control over who gets in your facility during business and non-business hours, right?
right, it can be, key fobs, it can be pin codes, it can be, it doesn't necessarily mean you're locking the facility down, but how are you controlling the access to and from? Who should be in your buildings, who should be in your facilities, is a key one that I ran into a lot too, is that driver supposed to be in the building, or
Right.
should that driver be, staying in the dock? Who's walking in? It was kind of funny when I started this job 9.5 years ago. If I walked in and just said, "Hey, I'm the safety guy," and people were just like, "Yeah, come on in." It's like,
Yeah,
am I the safety guy? Am I coming in there for,
exactly. So part of that, what else can we do? Again, emergency action plan. And then if you do have a plan, we'll get into those worst case scenario responses and actions here in just a couple minutes. But then the only way to see if your plan works is do what?
Well, you gotta test it. You
Gotta
gotta
test
drill.
You got to test it. So, in the event of an emergency evacuation, because of other types of emergencies, fires, things we talk about a lot, do we have a plan? We got to put maps up in our facility,
Yes, you
right?
gotta
Where
have
to
this,
go?
yeah, those shelters, the evacuation routes.
Bingo. It says bring in SMEs to help test and hone the plan. What's an SME?
Well, that'd be a subject matter expert, and that could be your local law enforcement.
Okay.
So we talk about it in fire prevention training, bring in the fire department, have you walk your facility. Well, same thing, bring in law enforcement, have them walk your facility and help them, they can help you test your plan and make sure that it's adequate for what, or it's appropriate for what you're needing.
Right. And a quick story. So when we talk about testing, so I went to a client, this was out here in one of the Dakotas. I'll just leave that there, okay. And we were doing a physical site security assessment. I was doing this physical site security assessment. And when I was at this particular facility, they had key card access for the doors. They have the breezeway entry. You could get into the first door, and then the second door was locked,
Yep.
and you had to call in. Love it.
Yep.
Love it. We found some issues with lighting in the parking lot, some other things. We do these physical site security assessments. I've done a handful of these over the years. It helps bring to light, but then it comes back into some of this testing. And then they had all these cameras as I'm going out to external cameras, internal cameras, doorway cameras. So at the end, when I'm going through and checking on some of what I'm finding and we're reviewing, I say, now I see all the cameras. That's awesome.
Right.
Can you tell me where's the main computer? You guys have like a main computer? Yes, we have that. Went to the computer. I said, can you guys pull it up? I just want to see, what it looks like, how the placement looks. And then, so they started typing in the stuff, and actually, I don't know. I haven't logged in on this in quite a while. So they brought the next person in. They couldn't log in. They got the IT person. They finally logged in just to show on the screen that your system needs to be updated. So I came back in like 45 minutes. They had it up and running, all to find out that a little bit more than half of the cameras weren't even working.
Yeah.
Testing. And how much did they spend putting all those in? Probably, it probably wasn't cheap, right?
No, it wasn't cheap, and it also gave them a false sense of security.
False sense of security, and then you have that tool, you paid for that tool, and then just like any other tool, what do you have to do? You got to maintain it.
You got to maintain it. You got to use it.
Yeah, bingo. So a lot of stuff here again, folks, and again, I won't read everything to you. However, some of this workplace policy, emergency action plan reporting, we want to give you guys something. Again, we're dumping a lot of information on you, trying to come at this from not the most hardcore active shooter stuff. but we want to give you some basic guidelines or guidance to start that development. Just like with any other hazard in the workplace, what do you have to do with the hazard? You have to assess it. You have to assess the risks with potential workplace violence. What could some of those risks be? Again, geographically, where am I? So I had a client that's in Minneapolis, and I went there for an annual visit. And when I was talking to them, we just in, our review, they talked about how they had to change access to their parking area and their facility because, unfortunately, where they were and where they were located, they had a lot of drug users and homeless folks and stuff. They were right there on the front main entryway to get in every day, and then their employees had to go past. And so is this a potential hazard?
Yeah.
So they had to make a change, and again, policies, reporting procedures, response, training, communication is a big one. Employee support and employee education. The employees need to know, and then they also need to know how they can support you.
Right.
The security measures, physical security measures, documentation, law enforcement involvement, like you mentioned.
Yep, and not blocking doors open, not, sneaking out for a smoke break and having a door open, but again, it goes back to assessing every facility based on your exposure.
Right. And then reviewing it, compliance, reporting, and just remember, folks, the proactive approach to identifying these things to mitigate potential. That's what we're talking about here. We're not saying you need to go from 0 to 60, but there are probably some elements you can incorporate, you can talk about just to be more proactive, to identify, to help keep your employees safe. So folks, our last survey, has your company ever completed a physical site security audit? I just talked about it a little bit, some elements of it, gave you an example of a couple different clients, some things that I've seen. So I'm just trying to gauge, have you guys ever done that or entertained it or talked about it? It's our recommendation that, again, you may not have the need for it, but it's not bad to at least do a one-time assessment and review. Go through, take a look at what you have, get some advice from an expert to say, hey, here's some suggestions. All right.
Just increase your awareness.
Increase your awareness, increase your level of security, and there's a bunch of other things to do. So seeing a lot of people punched in here, no, 26%, not sure. I kind of figured not sure may be a higher number today. 30% said yes. Again, 30% is good.
Yeah.
Like to see, all, if not most, if not all of you, do some type of physical site security audit or assessment. Good. So we're getting close to wrapping up here, folks. Just want to talk about that more severe type violence in the workplace action and then response.
Right.
Couple different, more mainstream response tactics and techniques out there, and there are a handful. Okay, I've trained on both Alice and Run, Hide, Fight, and you'll see those out there quite a bit in a lot of different trainings. So I want to talk to you just briefly about both of those. Pros and cons. The Alice, I'm going to tell you, is probably a little bit more in depth. Some elements of Alice just may not be able to even stick or be feasible. All right. But when you look at the acronym alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate, and some wordiness here of what that all entails, you really have to outline every step of Alice to figure out your plan, the elements and pieces of the plan, reporting, communication, what lockdown consists of.
Yep. And the lockdown could be a big, schools right now, we're seeing a lot of that where they're installing the gates and the barriers for the lockdown. So they have a more formal process, I would say, for the lockdown. So that may not fit all facilities with that type of.
I've seen it's harder to fit Alice moreover than our next one. And our next one here, again, are these all going to work and when? No, they don't. It's Run, Hide, Fight. And this one's been around for quite a while.
Yep.
It's simple. I mean, we talk about run. What is run? You get out of there. The first thing you can do is you have to get away. It's the disengage. You have to get away. Well, where do I run? What if there's actual shooting going on?
Well, and this is the thing when we talk about having a emergency evacuation point, it doesn't necessarily mean run to that evacuation point. If
So you don't want everybody to run and gather up at the emergency evacuation point if there's an active shooter, right?
No, because that again could expose you to,
Bingo. Yeah.
the situation. Get to a safe place. And what's a safe place? Somewhere where you're out of harm's way.
Yeah, maybe a nearby business you can go to, somebody else
Yeah.
calling 911, but just getting out and getting as far away as
Far
possible.
away.
Okay, and then folks, if you can't get out, you don't know if it's safe to get out. You can't, you have to stay where you are, so hide. This one, we're in a conference room right now. As part of hiding, it's always assessing your surroundings, right?
Yes, yeah, looking at the doorway.
Okay,
Can I block the doorway?
yeah, what
Good.
would you block with? I block with this big table we're sitting in front of.
Right, first I look and say, which way does the door swing?
Which
Does
way
it
does
swing
the door
in or
swing?
out?
Right.
And if it swings out, well, then obviously we can't really barricade it. And then are there windows on the doors, so.
Can I
Can
lock
you-
it from the inside? Is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Because again, you remember one thing, this person committing the act of violence, they're taking the path of least resistance.
they're moving quick, right? They want to hit what the easy target, move on,
Yep,
so they're not going to spend too much time trying to, get into something that's barricaded, maybe.
exactly. The door's locked, barricaded. They're not gonna try to
Lights
kick it
off.
down. Lights off, phones
Phone.
on silent.
Put your
or,
phone on silent. Yeah, try to literally hide.
Yes.
Okay, out of sight, out of mind. And then the very last resort, Ari,
Well, fight. And if you're gonna fight, and here's the thing, look around the room. Do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you have a chair? What do you have to fight with? And I say this all the time when I train on this is commit to it. Because if you're committing to it, you don't want to set yourself up
well,
for.
it literally could be life or death.
Exactly. And that's a great point. It's be committed, but make sure you can handle it. I think you mentioned too, if you can't pick up the fire extinguisher, get someone that can if you're with multiple people.
Right.
But be committed to it and make sure you're going to follow through with it because it is a life or death situation.
Yeah, good point. Folks, just some resources want to share with you and share they'll be, again, like I said, on our website. But of course, OECS comply us. I mean, we have, we have me, Ari, another one of our associates who have gone through workplace violence prevention training. Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, OSHA, NIOSH, SHRM, all have good resources out there. You'll see things that are very similar to or exactly what we talked about. So we just wanted to provide you with some resources as well, so you can do some of your own research. In summary, workplace violence can have a serious outcome, just like any other workplace hazard.
Mhm.
Is the hazard there every single day? No, maybe not. Is the potential for the hazard there? Yes. As much as I'd like to say no, we can just say no. We can
No.
negate it. I don't think we can say that in 2023.
No, I definitely don't think we can say that. But again, being proactive, like you've talked about, having that plan in place and taking the right steps
Right.
to try to mitigate it.
Yeah. And who has responsibility? Again, we outlined, can OSHA come in and say after an incident that you had responsibility here? Yes, I don't want to use that as that's the main reason. Number one reason is do everything you can to keep your employees safe. The goal for every employee at the end of every day is what?
Go home.
Go home. Okay.
Go home.
It's essential for you to have policies, develop a plan. And when you do that, you have to do what with plans and policies to your employees?
You gotta train them on
You
it.
got to train them and you got to communicate, folks. You have to. If you don't, you write something up nice and stick it on the bookshelf and it gathers dust. It's not doing you a lot of good.
No.
And then, again, educate your employees. You may need to tweak some plans here and there. So hopefully you guys were able to get something out of today's webinar and bring it back to your groups. As I said, a couple things while we wrap up. Number one, folks, is we always like to know how we're doing. Okay. What else can we do to improve? We always want to be better. We want to give you the best product. So if you could just simply rate us a 1, 2, or 3, 3 being great, helpful, 2, pretty good, 1, if you think that we missed the mark today, let us know. We definitely want to do our best and give you guys our best and move things in that direction all the time, every time we give one of these trainings. All right. I do want to just wrap up with saying, here's our contact info.
Yep.
If you do have stuff, I know there was some questions in the queue there. If they were bigger, we didn't get to them. We're not ignoring them. We go through all these at the end. Give us a call. You see our email, our direct phone numbers. Again, we'll share this in the presentation. Just to let everybody know, on October 19th, we do have another webinar coming up for all of our clients and our partners and associations and friends. Fire safety with the fire chief. We have Clark and Steve, who are both long-time firefighters, right?
Yes, and they've got some stories.
They got some stories. Yeah, hopefully some good ones to share with you guys. Folks, thank you guys very much for being here. We always appreciate you guys joining us for our webinars. We look forward to any of the questions, any of the follow-up. Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you.